Victor Jara, a Latin American tragedy. As storytellers, sometimes we have a dilemma. We have a story that needs to be told, that wants to be told. But it is such a tragic story that we hardly dare to bring it out. I have been pondering over this story for quite a long time, wanting and not wanting to tell it. I have decided that, though sad, it is important and worthy of being shared. So, this is my story. In the early 1960s, I went back to study at the Escuela de Teatro de la Universidad de Chile, the University of Chile's theater school. After living for almost 3 years in Cuba, I was looking forward to finishing my last year of studies and graduating. I arrived to class, as always, with at least 10 minutes to spare. Theater school was very strict. In a country where everything always started late, our classes started right on time. The door was closed on the dot. If you were 1 minute late, you were registered as absent, and the school demanded 90% attendance. So I was early, but not the first to arrive. On entering the classroom, I saw a newcomer, a young man. He had lots of black hair and expressive black eyes. I assumed he was a new student. Strange to have a new student at this time of the year. "Can I help? Are you looking for somebody?" He laughed. "No, I'm this term's teacher of acting. I'm Victor Jara." I realized then that he was the young theater director everybody was talking about. He was deemed to be interesting, maybe even important. He was different. Most of the teachers so far have been older men, respectable, good actors with a lot of experience. They imparted a firmly rooted theatrical tradition based on the teachings of Konstantin Stanislavski, the great guru from the Moscow Art Theater. We worked mostly with European classics, plays written by Chekhov, Ibsen, Priestley, Shakespeare, Molière, Brecht. But Victor surprised us. First of all, by his youth. He seemed to be the same age as the students. Also, in a country where usually artists and intellectuals were clearly of European descent, mostly from Spain, this new teacher was what in Chile they call very Chilean, a phrase meaning that he had in him a large percentage of indigenous blood. In Chile, class and race determined your status. It was unusual for someone like him to be a university professor. And he clearly had his own ideas. He valued what we had done so far, but said, now it is time to work within our own culture with Chilean or Latin American subjects. You feel stronger when you walk on your own land. That was certainly revolutionary. In those days, we were not even aware that Chile had a culture. Culture came from Europe. Art came from Europe. We had the typical outlook of the citizens of a previously colonized country. But we appreciated that this teacher opened new possibilities for us, and we liked that. Victor taught us just by being who he was, intelligent, sensitive, original, dedicated. He opened our eyes to the dramatic reality that surrounded us. He made us investigate and stage the stories of the Chilean people, peasants working in the fields, sellers of vegetables and fruits, street sweepers, bus drivers, factory workers, street children. Folk music was important in his productions. We discovered its beauty. and also realized that our teacher played the guitar like a pro and had a great voice. As time went by, we realized that Victor was becoming a star in the world of popular music. Soon, Victor became famous in Chile and then in the whole of Latin America as a musician, singer, and composer. In North America, this was the time of Pete Seeger, Joan Baez, Peter, Paul and Mary, John Lennon. Like them, Victor wanted to use his music as a political tool. Change was needed in a continent where class and racial differences prevailed. A few families owned the land and all the resources and had always held the political power. I was already working as a professional actress when I heard that Victor had married one of my teachers in theater school, Joan Turner, a beautiful blue-eyed English dancer. She had a daughter from a previous marriage, and they soon had another little girl. They were happy. Joan and Victor shared the same aspirations of creating a just society. They actively participated in the Popular Unity Movement, a coalition of political parties which had elected a new government. The coalition initiated a series of reforms that were not accepted by those who traditionally had been in power. It was a time of great controversy and political upheaval in our country, but we had hopes. We lived in a democracy. We would find a way to positive agreements. Then, on September 11, 1973, a violent military coup happened in Chile. At that time, I lived with my family in Valdivia, a small university city 1,000 kilometers away from Santiago. The news we received about the coup were confused. There was a strict curfew. We couldn't come out of our houses. All work was suspended. Rumors abounded. We tried not to believe the goriest ones. Chile had always been a peaceful country. We heard alarming, conflicting news. Finally, confirmations reached us. Names of the dead, of the disappeared, of the executed. It was unbelievable. We became scared and cautious. Do not speak. Do not complain. Do not trust. Do not go out. One day we saw a brief item of news in the only newspaper allowed. September 18, Victor Jara was buried in a private ceremony. He was 41. He shared his fate with many others. Sons, daughters, fathers and mothers, husbands, dead. The fact we had lived in revolutionary Cuba for 3 years made us suspect to the military government. We decided to immigrate to Canada as soon as we could. We succeeded in 1976. It wasn't easy, but here we are. There's an unexpected twist to this story. In the year 2013, my daughter Valentina spent several months in the south of France. She had been writing a historical novel set in the Provence, and the time had come for her to check her description of places and landscapes and immerse herself in the atmosphere of her novel. Once there, she decided to visit the old city of Nîmes, a beautiful place rich in history with medieval streets and houses. After exploring the city's many treasures, she realized it was almost lunchtime. In one corner, she saw a restaurant with a sign in Spanish, El Rincón Chileno. the Chilean nook. Of course, it was the perfect place. She entered a small room with at most 10 tables. A few customers were scattered here and there. She noticed a painting on one of the walls. It was a portrait of a man she knew well because she had seen his face on the many long play covers and CDs we had at home. It was Victor Jara. Behind him, there was a view of the Andes Mountains. Colorful celebratory flags, birds, and flowers turned the portrait into a homage. Valentina had a good lunch and, when drinking her coffee, asked the waitress where the restaurant got its name from. Oui, c'est le patron, she said. Il est chilien. She went to call him. An older man appeared and sat down to chat. Valentina told him why she was intrigued by the portrait. Le patron responded with an amazing story. At the time of the military coup, he had been 20 years old and working in his first job in the National Registry Office. After the first couple of days, he was sent to the Santiago morgue to identify the bodies that were being brought there in great number. They came from different places of detention and interrogation, where the military and the police were concentrating everyone they considered subversive. It was a horrible job, even more so for somebody so young and inexperienced. They were required to keep absolutely quiet about what they were seeing there, the conditions of the bodies, how numerous they were, etc. It was a gruesome task. They had to check identities and fingerprints when there were doubts. At that time in Chile, every citizen had to have an identity card, which included fingerprints. On the third day of working in the midst of this nightmare, he saw a body he recognized. It was riddled with bullets. It had been beaten. It was muddy as if he had been laying on a field, the features swollen and battered. But he knew him. He knew him well. He had admired him on stage many times. It was Victor Jara. When he took his fingerprints, he noticed that his hands were broken at the wrists. The ruling class, through the military, had unleashed their hate on Victor, whom they considered an upstart who came from nowhere but dared to become famous and admired. He had even dared to marry an English woman and together spread a message of equality and justice. The young man realized that he had to keep very quiet about this. To make sure that his identification was correct, he asked another colleague to get him Victor's documentation, which registered his fingerprints so that he could compare them. He was not mistaken. But he thought of Victor's wife, who surely was anxiously waiting for him. He found out her address. So early after the coup, the curfew was lifted only for a few hours every day. As soon as this happened, he took a bus to Victor's house. As he had expected, Joan was greatly concerned. She had not seen or heard from her husband since the day of the coup, when he had gone early to his place of work. The news of his death was a terrible shock. She went with the young man to the morgue. There were so many bodies that it was hard to find Victor, but finally they did. Joan says, I was lucky to find him and know what had happened and not be like so many Chilean women whose relatives just disappeared, many of them forever. People in charge were moved by her despair, and after warning her not to talk about it with anybody, she was allowed to take Victor home. Otherwise, after 3 days, he would have been buried in a common grave and declared disappeared. This terrible story has been amply documented. Right now, Joan Jara, who is over 90 years old, is still trying to bring to justice the killers of her husband. I know that one of the alleged murderers lived for many years in peace and quiet in Florida and became a U.S. citizen through marriage. The young man who so bravely took on the responsibility of telling Joan about the fate of her husband did not stay for long in Chile. He realized that he was in danger because of his knowledge of what had really happened to Victor. He could go to prison, or worse. He asked for asylum in the French embassy. From there, he went to Provence and made a life for himself in that quiet corner of Nîmes, running a restaurant where he could still taste the flavors of Chile and share them with his new compatriots. Valentina's tale about her encounter in Nîmes brought to me strong memories of Victor, a man who had played a meaningful role in my life. Her story was a message that reminded me that as humans, we are linked and responsible for each other, even if we're not aware of it. What touches one does at the end touch all of us. That's why I decided to tell this story. Thank you for listening. Yo no canto por cantar, ni por tener buena voz. Canto porque la guitarra tiene sentido y razón. Tiene corazón de tierra y alas de palomita. Es como el agua bendita, santigua, glorias y penas. Que no es guitarra de rico, ni cosa que se parezca. Mi canto es de los andamios para alcanzar las estrellas. Que el canto tiene sentido cuando palpitan las venas del que morirá cantando las verdades verdaderas. I don't sing just to sing, nor because I'm good at it. I sing because the guitar has good sense and reason. It has a heart of earth and little pigeons' wings. It's like holy water, sanctifies glories and hardships. It's not a rich man's guitar or anything like that. My singing aims from the scaffolds to the stars. Singing has meaning when it beats in the veins of all who die to sing what's true.
But instead it was you. And it may be me, dear sisters and brothers, before we are through. But if you can die for freedom, 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 if you can die for freedom, I can too. The junta took the fingers from Victor Jara's hands. They said to the gentle poet, play your guitar now if you can. Well, Victor started singing until they shot his body down. You can kill a man, but not a song when it's sung the whole world around. And it could have been me, but instead it was you. So I'll keep doing the work you were doing as if I were too. I'll be a student of life, a singer of songs, a farmer of food, and a writer of wrong. It could have been me, but instead it was you. And it may be me, dear sisters and brothers, before are through. But if you can sing for freedom, 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 if you can sing for freedom, I can